Hey guys, welcome to the third lesson on fundamentals of C# programming. Today we're going to be talking about how we use loops in C#. We're going to cover how we use the while loop, the for loop, and the do while loop. Alright, so let's get started. So, what is a loop? A loop is a structure that a way that we can execute a block of code a certain amount of times or a set amount of times. Now, depending on the condition of what we want to execute our code on, we can use different types of loops. The first loop that we're going to talk about is a while loop. Now, a while loop executes the block of code based off of its expression that it's evaluating in its parameters. And while that expression remains true, the while loop will continue to execute forever. So let's create a basic while loop that displays the word hello to the console 5 times. So the first thing we need in our while loop is we need a way that we can control a variable that will help us make the loop only execute 5 times. And this variable that we're going to use is called a loop control variable, where it pretty much is the loop. It controls the loop. So we'll create that variable. We'll say that variable is called number, and it has the value of 0 stored into it. We'll then create the while loop, and the syntax for that is the while keyword. And then in its parentheses, we want to put the expression that's being evaluated every time the loop iterates once. So our expression is going to be, we want to make sure that our number is less than 5. And if that number is then greater than 5, then the loop won't execute. So let's type in number is less than 5, and then our parentheses. Now we'll create our block for our loop, and our code that is within this block of code, in the block will execute every single time the while loop goes off. So our code that we want is the first thing we want to display a message to the console. We want to display the word hello. Then we need to do one more thing, because if we would leave the loop like this and the code executed, this would be what is called an infinite loop. And I'll show more examples with this, but this is an infinite loop because when we start off, number is declared as 0. So while 0 is less than 5, that's true. So that will always be true because the variable number is never changed at all during the execution of the loop. So number will always be 0, and 0 will always be less than 5. So this will go on forever. And I will show that soon. But in order to fix this, we need to change number so that it makes this expression not always evaluate true. We only want this expression to evaluate true for as long as we want the loop to run. Since we only want it to run 5 times, we want number to increment 1 time every single time the loop is ran. So below this console.write line, I'm going to add in a number plus equal 1. This takes number and adds 1 to it. Now when the loop runs, number will go up by 1, thus terminating the loop, because every time it goes up, number goes up. So eventually number will get to 5, and then 5 is not less than 5, and then that will stop the execution of the loop. So to see how this works, let's run the program. And you can see in the output we have 5 hellos. And the reason why we have 5 hellos is, let me just go over this. Since number is starting at 0, you would think, oh, well, maybe we have 6 hellos. But no, we have 5 because I'm using the less than sign. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't go off when number is 5 because 5 is not less than 5. So we only have 5 hellos displayed. Now, a while loop can handle any condition that evaluates to a true or false value. Since we're using the less than operator, that returns either true or false because we're doing a comparison. But it can handle all types of true and false values. So it can use anything that's less than, greater than, equal, or not equal, or it could even use the bool operator itself. So let's say if I had a and if I had a, let's say, a bool variable called my bool and said it's equal to true, since it's a bool value and it always evaluates to true or false, we could just use this in a while loop also if we wanted to do a while loop based off of a condition. So we could say while my bool equals true, or like that. But like I said, you can, when you're comparing with a while loop, or when you're doing a comparison with a bool, you can omit the equals true if you're doing a comparison for equality. So this statement, while my bool without saying anything, means while my bool is true. Um, but now, like I said, if I were to go like this and make a message console write line hello, this is an infinite loop because it never terminates. My bool is a variable that's set to equal to true, but we never change the value of my bool. So my bool will always be true. So this in essence is just saying while true, which is an infinite loop. Because like I said, the while loop always continues as long as whatever values in the condition is true. And since my bool is true and it never changes, this will always execute. So if I show you this, you can't even see it, but this is going on forever. It's never stopping. So this is an infinite loop. Okay, so a while loop has two features to it, I guess you can say. A while loop can be an indefinite loop, or a while loop can be a definite loop. Now, our last example, if I go back to that, hold on. This is an example of a definite loop. This is considered a definite loop because we know when the loop will terminate. We can fully control how many times it's going to execute, and we know when it's going to stop. An indefinite loop is a loop where we don't know when it's going to stop. It's up to either the user or some kind of thing that we just don't have control over, and we don't know when the loop is going to terminate. That is considered an indefinite loop. Now, I want to make an example of an indefinite loop. So, yeah, as you can see, this is a definite loop. It has a variable that controls the execution. Now, definite loops, although a while loop can be an indefinite or definite loop, there's a shorthand loop that was created um, to make this process easier of a definite loop or a counter control loop, and that's the for loop. The for loop replaces this syntax, this basic pattern of a counter controlled while loop, um, and it's pretty much built into a for loop. And I'll show the comparison and how they relate after I go over the indefinite loop, where really the while loop shines is the indefinite loop. So let's do this. So I'm gonna make a program with the indefinite loop that is a simple bank balance program that will display the balance of your bank account every year after the interest rate and stuff like that. So to get started, we're gonna make a variable called bank balance. That's gonna be our balance. And we're gonna put $1,000 into it. We're gonna make a constant variable to hold our interest rate. So we set our interest rate. Um, Now we're gonna display our message to our first message to the console to ask them if they want to see their balance or not. So we'll write console dot write line. Do you want to? I can't type today. See your balance. Y. Let's do a Y or an N. Um, we'll say Y or N. So we'll ask the user. We'll take in a character, and we'll ask the user to either enter in a Y or an N if they want to continue to see their balance, or an N if they don't want to see their balance. So that's our message, Y or N. Now we're going to set up our while loop. We're in our while loop. Now we need our condition. we need to determine what should we make our condition in order to make our while loop continue as long as the user wants to. So what we're going to do is we're going to take in an input. We're going to take in what they entered, either the y or n, and then we'll do a while loop based on that character that they entered, and we'll say while that is a y, we're going to continue the loop. So as long as they are typing in y's, we're going to continue executing our loop. As soon as they don't hit that y, it'll terminate the program and then display a goodbye message. So first we need to get in our response. So we'll make it a character, which is just the char keyword, and then we'll say it's our response, and then we'll say it's equal to um, console.readline, but we're gonna get an error on here. If you remember, console.readline comes in as a string, and since we're trying to store it into a character, we need to parse this string into our representation of a character. So we'll do a character.parse in front of it and put the string inside of it. So this is the standard. And there are other ways to do this, but this is what I use. I use the parse keywords. So now we have our string parsed into our character response. Now we can set up our while loop. We'll say while our response is equal to a y. Now, then we'll do some code. We'll get to that. Now, before I do that, I want to go back to our last lesson where we use compound expressions inside of if statements. Well, we can use the same thing here inside of our while statement because they're just expression statements. So if I set it up like this and I said while response equals uppercase y, this will only be true if they do enter an uppercase y. If they enter a lowercase y, it will act as if they didn't enter a y at all because we didn't tell it to do that. Now, there are several ways to do this. You could convert it to a string and then use the two lower or two upper keywords. If you know that, then go ahead and use that. In later lessons, I will be using that, I'm sure. But in this case, since we're using a character, instead of converting it to a string, we'll just use an or expression or an or statement to add the second response. So if you remember, an or statement says that either the left-hand side or the right-hand side has to be true. Only one of them has to be true for the whole thing to be true. So we'll say response equals uppercase y or response equals a lowercase y. So now if they enter an uppercase or lowercase y, the while loop will still be true. Okay, so now that our while loop is set up, now let's program the contents of the loop that we want to execute every time the while loop goes off. So the first thing we want to do is display the balance of our bank. So we'll say console.writeLine bank balance is, and we'll use the placeholder method, and we'll put in our bank balance. Now I'm going to use the toString operator to format it into currency. So by going, if I just put bank balance without this other part, it would just display the 1,000. But if I convert it to a string using formatting, and I pass in a C in quotes in the toString like this will convert my bank balance into a representation of currency. So it'll show the dollar sign and the decimal. So now we're displaying our value into the console. Okay. So now the next thing we want to do is, now that we displayed our balance, we want to, now for the next time around, we want to add our interest rate to our bank. So how much money we'll have next time around for the next year. So in order to do that, we'll just say bank balance plus equal, because we're going to be adding something to it. We're going to be adding the bank balance times the interest rate to it. So we'll just go like this. So now this gets the interest rate for the next year and then adds it to our current bank balance. Since it's a variable, we can do that. So that next time the loop comes around and they hit a Y again for their response, when it displays the bank balance here, it will just be ready and display it right away. So now we need to re-output to the console and say, do you want to see next year's balance? Yes or no. So we'll go console.writeLine. Do you want to see next balance y or n. And then once again, we can use the same response variable for our character. It doesn't really matter. We already have it defined. Equals character.parse console.readline. Okay, so now our response is once again stored into our response variable. So when this runs, it will come down, it will get into the while loop if they type in a y. It will display my balance. It will increment my balance based on the interest rate for the next year. Then I'll ask the user, do they want to see the next year's balance? This will wait here until they enter in yes or no. So it will actually freeze the while loop. It won't exit the while loop until they enter the next yes or no. Depending on what they enter, it will do Y. Response will be stored with whatever they entered, and then when it goes back up for the while loop check, it will recheck what they entered. If they entered in another Y, it will continue again, display the new balance, do the whole process again. But if they don't enter a Y in here, then when it comes up for the while loop comparison, it will see that they didn't enter a Y, and then it will break out of the while loop and continue on whatever we're doing. And we'll display a message down here saying, have a nice day once we are done with our loop. So, now you might be noticing that in this while loop, how we set this program up, we display to the user, do you want to see your balance 2 times? And we ask the we get the response 2 separate times. One for the initial one before we go into the loop, and then one while we're in the loop. Now, we do this because we have to with the while loop. Now, there's another loop called the do while loop that allows us to not have to do this. The do while loop, which we'll get to, can ensure that we always can guarantee at least one execution of the loop, so that based off of that, we don't have to duplicate it. Because the reason why we have to do it 2 times here is because we can't guarantee that the user's going to type in Y the first time, or we can't even get into this while loop unless they do type in something. Whereas a do while loop guarantees at least one execution before it starts doing the comparison of while loops. The comparison of the loop. So now let's run the program. So it says, do you want to see your balance, yes or no? I'll type in yes. So it says my bank balance is $1,000. Now it says, do you want to see next year's balance? If I hit yes again, it will calculate actually it already calculated the interest rate, but it will display it to me. It will show me the next year's balance with the interest rate, so 1,040. I can keep on doing Y's and seeing the new rate. As you can see, this is my balance for my account every year, and it will keep on going up forever. Now this is why in this context of the while loop, it's called an indefinite while loop, because we don't know how long when the loop is going to terminate. Because as you can see, the user could do this forever, literally forever, and it will go on forever. And we don't, the computer doesn't has no idea when the loop is going to end. So that's why it's called a indefinite loop. So now if I want to end it and break out of the loop, I can type in any letter that's not a Y, but we'll type in an N, and then if I type in an N, it's going to break out of the loop and then continue where it left off. So when the compiler is coming in and reading this code, or I mean the computer, and it's reading this code, it starts from the top and continues down the bottom, executing all the lines of code. Once it gets into the while loop, it stays in the while loop for as long as we program it to. But as soon as this while loop breaks out and it's not true anymore, it's going to pick up where it left off right here and then continue down. So if I hit the N, now if I go N and hit enter, we'll see my message, have a nice day, and my loop is done. We broke out of everything and everything is terminated. So this was an indefinite while loop, and now we're gonna get into what's the difference between indefinite and definite loops. But we're gonna use for loops and show you how they work with while loops and for loops, the comparison with those two. All right, so let's go back and let's create a simple while loop, a definite while loop. So we'll say int counter equals 0 while my counter is less than 10 we'll just go console.writeLine, hello, and then we'll do counter plus plus. Counter plus plus can be replaced with either counter equals counter plus 1 or counter plus equal 1. All three of these are the same exact thing. Oops. All three of these are the same exact thing. Counter plus plus is just shorthand, so I'm going to use that. That increments it by 1. You can look at the last lessons to see the difference between postfix, increment, and prefix and things like that. But yeah, so this increments counter by 1. So now to run the program, we can see this is working perfect. We have 10 hellos. I'm actually gonna, I'll go ahead and just display our hello number here also. So I'll display counter right here. So now you can see 0 to 9, there's my counters, and those are my hellos. Now, like I said, this is a counter control while loop. It's a definite loop. We know how long it's going to execute. We know it's going to execute 10 times. Now, a shorthand way and a way to make this go faster is the for loop. A for loop is always definite, a definite loop, and um, and it's a counter control loop. So let's make a for loop that looks just like this, and I'll show you the differences, and I'll compare them fully. So the syntax for a for loop is the for keyword, and then it's parentheses. So the first part of the for loop is the counter control variable initialization. So I'm going to make my variable here. So I'm going to call it I. It's just a standard that your for loop, your first for loop, when you're doing it, the counter control variable is just standard called I. It's just a standard. You don't have to do. You can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to say int I equals 0. That's my counter control variable. The next part, I add a semicolon. The semicolons split up the parts of the for loop. The next part of the for loop is the condition. This is where it does the comparison, and while this part is true, the for loop continues to execute. So I'll go I is less than 10. Then a semicolon. The last part of the for loop is the part that either increments or decrements the counter control variable. It's the part that makes it not an infinite loop. It modifies the counter control variable and however you want to program it. I'm going to do I++ because I want the variable to go up. Since it's starting at 0, I want it to go up because I'm doing a comparison while I is less than 10. So we know it's going to execute 10 times because it's going up by 1 every single time. So that's our for loop body declaration. Our name, the header declaration. So now we need to put our blocks in for our code. It's the same thing like that. But now when we display to the console, we don't need to increment it anymore. In here, we can just go hello, 0, and then I. So these two are exactly equivalent. If I run the program, you can see hello, you can see them both. Hello to 9, and then hello to 9. So as you can see, these two, like I said, are the same. The while loop can do the for loop, can do anything the for loop can do. But the for loop has a little bit more compact. It's all built into its header. So as you can see, in the while loop, the counter control variable is declared above it like there. In the for loop, it's declared right here. These two lines are equivalent. In the while loop, the comparison is right here inside the while body, in the while header. In the for loop, it's right here. It's the second condition in the for loop. These two are equivalent. The third part of the for loop, and the third part of the while, is the increment operator, what stops it from being an infinite loop. And in the while loop, that's in the body of the while loop right here. And in the for loop, it's built into the header right there. So how the for loop executes is it starts I at 0, it checks, is 0 less than 10? If it is, then it runs the body of the loop. It doesn't increment until it runs the body of the loop the first time. It runs to this, then it goes back to the for loop. Then it increments before it does the comparison again. It increments then, so then I is 1 less than 10. If it is, it executes. It goes back. Increments I. Then it says, is 2 less than 10? Yes, it is. So it keeps on executing like that. Whereas the while loop, we had to program all the components ourselves. We made the counter control variable here, our condition is here, and our increment operator is here. They're all separate. The for loop makes it more compact, easier to read, and easier to make, actually. So these are the differences between the for loop and the while loop. Um, uh, okay. All right. Now let's talk about the last loop that we're going to talk about for now. There is a couple more loops. There's a go-to loop. I'm not going to go over that. But then there's also a for each loop, and we'll talk about that in later lessons. It's not important to talk about now. But yeah, there are more loops. These are just three popular common loops that we are going over right now. So the last loop that I'm going to go over is the do while loop. And like I said before, the do while loop can guarantee that the loop will execute one time first, at least one time. Now, besides that difference, the do while and the while loops are almost identical. Um, and I'm gonna remake the bank program using the do while loop, and to show you that we don't have to duplicate any code. We don't have to write the output 2 times. We don't have to do any of that because the do loop can ensure at least one execution of the body of the loop. So the syntax for the do while loop is the do keyword. Then, since we can guarantee at least one body execution, we don't put the condition of the loop right now. We just put the body to guarantee that we are getting at least one execution of the code. Then we could, like I said, now we could put our body in whatever code we want to do. The condition where it checks for as long as the loop executes comes at the end, so we can ensure at least one loop. So that goes here now. So I can say while, whatever, I can put whatever. I'll just put true right now. So while true, and then a semicolon. There is a semicolon at the end of the do while loop. So this is the syntax for the do while loop. It's the do keyword, then your blocks, then inside your blocks, whatever you want your code to do, and then your condition comes last. Like I said, the condition comes last to ensure we get at least one execution of the loop. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and write the code for the bank balance program now. Now it's a lot simpler. Now it's only 4 lines of code for that whole program instead of whatever it was before. So let's go ahead and write console.writeLine. Bank balance is placeholder. And then we'll put in our bank. Oh, wait, I gotta remake my variables. I'm just gonna copy and paste them. Okay, bank balance. ToString C. This, like I said, the C again is for converting my bank balance into a currency representation. So okay, so there we go. We displayed our bank balance. The next line was now we gotta for the next year round we gotta increment our bank balance based off the interest rate. So bank balance plus equal bank balance times our interest rate. There we go. Now that we have that, now we're just going to display, do you want to see next year's balance? Console.writeLine. Do you want to see next year's balance? Y or N. And then we'll take in our response. Let me go ahead and just put that up here. So our response equals character dot parse read line. All right. Now the last part is our while loop, and this is going to be our check like it was last time. Response equals y or response equals lowercase y. So here's the entire program. We have our variable declarations up here. Okay. So we display it, we increment it, we say, do you want to display next year? We wait for our response, then we do the check at the end. So whatever they enter in here, it will check at the end of it if they entered in a while. If they did, then the loop will execute again. But like I said, once again, the do loop has no condition up here. So it executes this body no matter what. The reason why we couldn't do this before is because uh, the while loop, in order to get into the while loop, it checks the condition at least one time. The first time it checks it. So we need to ask the user to enter in something so that we can check it the first time. So that's why we had to duplicate our code. But like I said, since we have the do loop now, we don't have to do that. It executes the first time no matter what. So let's run the program. So it displayed my balance, and then I can hit yes, 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 yes. It's still the same exact thing. And I didn't program anything, but hit no. I could make it say that message again just by putting the message here. Okay, let's do it again. And then no. Have a nice day. So that is the do while loop. Okay, so the last thing I want to show in this lesson is it's not a construct. It's not using a loop. It's not any of those concepts, but it's rather an idea or concept of its own. It's more of a practice. In programming, once you start getting into programming, you'll see that there are so many times that you'll want to keep a variable for keeping a running total, or while you're in a loop, you want to total things up and you want to maintain a total amount of something. You're always dealing with something with keeping a running total. So I just want to quickly make a program that will just show you how, if you were to write a program, how you would keep a running total and things like that. So I'm gonna make a program that just has a purchase amount, and you keep on typing in purchase amounts, and it adds it to your total. And then once you are done with your adding to your total, it will display the total at the end. So delete this. So to start off, we'll just start off by displaying to the user, enter uh, in an amount. It doesn't really matter. Then I'm gonna take the amount that they enter, stored into a variable. I'm gonna make my amount a double so that they can enter in decimal point values. I'll say amount equals double dot parse console dot read line. So now I have my amount stored. Now, since I know that my while loop is going to execute, and every time it executes, I'm going to add in the value of whatever was typed in last. I need to create that variable that's going to hold the totals. So I'm going to do that here, outside of the while loop. Now, I'll show you the differences with putting it inside the while loop and why we can't do that. But I'm going to make my while loop my variable out here, and I'm going to instantiate or initialize the variable to 0. I'm initializing the variable to 0. That's actually very important. If I don't initialize it to 0 and I start trying to add to it, I'm going to get an error because I can't add to 0. I can't add to nothing. Since total had no value, I can't just start adding to it. I need to initialize it to 0 first, so then I can keep running total and add to it then. So now that I have that, I'm going to do my while loop. Now, I'm going to make my program continue in the while loop for as long as whatever they entered is not a 0. So if they enter in any number besides 0, then it will keep on adding it and make that running total. If they enter in a 0, that means they're done, and it breaks out of the loop and shows me the total. So I'm going to do my while loop. I'm going to say amount is not equal to 0. I'm checking for the amount. The amount is whatever they typed in. So while that amount is not equal to 0, I'm going to continue the loop. Every time the loop comes in, I'm going to make my running total. So I'm going to say total plus equal amount. Whatever the amount was, I'm going to add it to my total. I'm making that running total. Then I'm going to display enter the next purchase amount or 0 to quit. Once again, as you can see, we have that duplication of code. We have it there, and now we have it here. That's always going to be the case when we're using a while loop because that's how the while loop works. If we wanted to remove that, we can use a do while loop, but I'm just showing with the while loop for now. So enter next amount or 0 to quit, and then we'll take it in with amount equals double dot parse console dot read line. There's our amount, and our while loop is done. Now the last thing we're going to do is when we break out of the while loop, I'm going to display the total of my total variable placeholder, and I'm going to do it with a toString C again for the currency, and there we go. So how the program works is we start off, we enter a number, we create our variable that starts at 0. We go into the while loop. Then while we're in the while loop and they don't enter, while it's not equal to 0, we increment our total based off of whatever they entered. We ask them to enter the next amount. We console.reline it. We get the next amount here, and then it does the check again. If that check is not equal to 0, it will repeat the process, adding it to the new total. If it is 0, it breaks out, and then it displays to me the total. So if we run it, so I'll start off $50. Okay, enter next amount, $60, $100, $80, $65, $10, $24, $600, and $1,000. Now I'm done, I don't want to do anymore. I type in a 0, then hit enter, and then it says your total is $1,989. So this is an example of using a variable to maintain your count and create a total variable that's making a running total. Like I said, this is a very common practice, and if you do get into software programming and make programs and get into programming in general, you're most likely going to be making programs to do stuff like this. So it's just nice to see how it works, and based off of this, you can do so many things. Loops really are a powerful tool in programming and allow you to do almost anything. Without loops, programming would be very difficult. As you'll see in the next lesson, once we talk about arrays, loops come into more play with arrays and collection types, and it never ends. Loops are always very important. So it's important to fully understand the concept of loops and to really be able to use them at any time you need to. So yeah, so that's this while loop. Now I want to show you real fast. If I define my counter variable outside the while loop, I did that for a reason, because if you think about it, if I take out that and put that inside the body of my while loop, if I define it in there, first of all, that's going to error, but don't worry about that. If I define it in here, every single time my while loop executes, it will make a new variable of total, and it gets initialized to 0. It gets reset every single time, so this won't actually keep a running total. It will reset to 0 every single time the while loop executes. So that's why we can't put it inside there. We need to put it outside the while loop so that it has free control to access inside the while loop and outside the while loop. Alright, yeah, so this is the while loop with keeping a running total. Alright, so that's it for this lesson. I hope everyone enjoyed watching it, and yeah.